Okay, so I know what's standing between you and lunch is an electric vehicle fire. So indulge me in the next couple of minutes as we share with you a project that we undertook last summer in July of 2024 through the Firefighter Cancer Initiative. So at this time, I want to invite my 4 scientists up to the stage who will be supporting this panel presentation. I'll begin by moderating and introducing to you the research project. So if on the stage I could be joined by Dr. Helena Solo-Gabriele, Akash, Shruti, and Dr. Emre Dikici. Okay, so this next project that I'll be introducing to you is regarding a question that came up last year from our firefighters regarding electric vehicle fires. They said, you know, we're seeing an increasing response rate to electric vehicles. What are the hazards that emerge from there? So one of the privileges about working in the Firefighter Cancer Initiative is that we get to do translational science. Go from the bench and bring all that science out to the fire station, and in reverse, take the questions from the fire station and bring them back to population sciences and bench sciences. This is that project today. So what I want to do is for the next few minutes is share with you a little bit about the project. I'm going to introduce it, to set it up as the study design, and then I'm going to pass it on to each of our scientists to share with you the results that we gained from each of the aspects of the project. First, I would like to acknowledge the funding for this project, which comes to us from the state of Florida. As has been mentioned before, the appropriations from the state of Florida help us thrive in the Firefighter Cancer Initiative and answering the question about cancer in the fire service, as well as fundings from the National Cancer Institute from the NIH that support a lot of the infrastructure that we're able to do. And what we're sharing with you today is our own viewpoints as scientists and not necessarily from the university or elsewhere. Okay, so what was the primary goal or primary research goal of this particular project? So we wanted to evaluate electric vehicle fires and any potential cancer risk by identifying and quantifying some of the toxic chemicals that are released during an EV fire. So we know from our colleagues in Sweden, from the RISE Institute, and from others, that lithium-ion battery packs, while it sounds like lithium is the primary metal, there are many actual other metals that are present in that space, such as zinc, lead, copper, lithium, cobalt, manganese, and nickel. And the ability for us to sort of understand and look at what are those exposures requires a transdisciplinary approach of being able to ask different scientists to look at this particular scenario and find out what we're doing. To get the study design started, I'm going to show with you a 4-minute PSA video that was designed through this project to be able to inform firefighters and the community about the dangers of electric vehicle fire.
For drill initiation.
What you are seeing is an electric vehicle.
Command, go for E.
On fire. This experiment, in collaboration with the Florida Division of State Fire Marshals, is an attempt to understand a dangerous phenomenon surrounding lithium-ion batteries.
There's over 1 billion batteries a year put into the general population. It takes every aspect of our lives, from our smartwatch, our cell phones, tablets, appliances in your kitchen.
Unlike regular fires, they burn extremely intense, with very little warning, and are incredibly difficult to put out.
The general public needs to know what they have, what they already have in their household, and potentially what they're buying. I don't mean that all these batteries are unsafe. What I mean by that is there is a potential that if there is a problem, or if you're misusing your batteries, or you have an aging battery, or you're using the wrong chargers, that you're going to have a problem. And the problem is going to be a lot bigger than what you think it may be, and it could be a deadly problem.
To understand these risks, the Firefighter Cancer Initiative at the University of Miami and their collaborators conducted tests on both individual battery cells on a full electric vehicle. For this research demonstration, lithium-ion batteries in this vehicle are of the pouch type and modular in design, and consist of many smaller pouches.
Lithium-ion batteries are a challenge in the United States, and certainly for us in the fire service, it's a fairly new type of energy that the fire service is starting to see. We're seeing it in everything from a cell phone to micromobility devices, but also EV vehicles.
We're going to break a lithium-ion battery down to a one-cell battery, commonly known as the 18650 battery. It's the most common battery. There's about 8,000 or more of these in a EV, in the battery coils.
The cell is placed on a hot plate, exploding with significant force within seconds. Remnants found 30 feet away. Now imagine the potential danger of thousands of these cells in larger devices or vehicles. As the electric vehicle catches fire, we see high-pressure gas expanding from the cells. And just as we saw earlier, batteries shooting out in all directions. Complicating the situation, these fires burn intense. The amount of water to fight them shows it.
Basically 500 to 750 gallons of water for a normal family-sized car. When you're starting to see a lot of the stats with a typical EV fire, that there was 30,000 gallons used, there was 40, there was 20. It's important to realize that really the water, if it's not reaching the cells and cooling it down, you're not really putting the fire out.
Florida's division of the State Fire Marshal's Office is collaborating with Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center at the University of Miami. The goal is to understand the risk to first responders.
Electric vehicle fires actually have metals, and metals are easily connected to cancer development. And so we really want to look at how and what types of metals these firefighters come across in that fire, and what we could do to ultimately protect them and the community where they're turning off these fires.
This is a huge wake-up call for us. The quicker that we can identify what we need to handle these types of fires, the quicker we're going to keep our community safe, the quicker we're going to make our firefighters safe.
Right now, though, there are steps you can take to protect yourself and your family. Use only manufacturer's-approved chargers and cables for your devices.
Remember, some of these batteries are so specialized, they come with specialized chargers for a reason, so that they don't overheat, so that they're charged at a constant rate.
Avoid overcharging your devices or leaving them plugged in overnight. Keep batteries away from heat sources and direct sunlight. Dispose of old or damaged batteries properly at designated recycling centers. Be aware of signs of battery failure, such as swelling, overheating, or unusual odors. If you suspect a lithium-ion battery fire, 1. Evacuate the area immediately. 2. Call 911. 3. Do not attempt to fight the fire yourself.
It's great technology, it really is. It's how it's being applied, and it's happening so quickly that I don't think the fire service is prepared for it, and we're really behind the 8 ball. We're trying to play catch up.
I think people just need to be aware, and people are starting to become aware. We need to be very proactive and try to really embed this into our culture, what the dangers are.
By understanding the risks and taking simple precautions, we can all help prevent lithium-ion battery fires and keep our communities safer. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and stay safe.
So this video hopefully shows you the concern that was brought to us in terms of understanding what these individual exposures are. The work that I'm going to present to you and my colleagues share with you today is really a case report. I want to emphasize the importance of the fact that this is not a full-fledged research project, as only 4 firefighters were actually involved in the project. But this is how science begins. You begin incrementally with one small report and expand. The areas of concern or toxins that we want to know is how are the toxins that are in an EV fire similar or different from a combustion engine, and these new concerns of higher quantities of metals that are present impact risk. So we've been looking at metals, biomarkers of inflammation and immune response, polyfluoroalkylated substances, PFAS or forever chemicals, and polyaromatic hydrocarbons, a traditional measurement that we use in combustion engines. So the study was designed using hazmat, like our hazmat firefighters have taught us. We set our Cartesian plane, and within the Cartesian plane at the center was the electric vehicle fire. Traffic cones were placed north, south, east, and west around it with different apparatus and device measurements, which you will hear shortly. And firefighters were also empaneled with aerosol detection devices. So this is July, very hot in the state of Florida. We were all sweating. All the scientists here were drenched in sweat trying to set up all of it. You can see that on the right-hand side, we used painter's tape to set up individual cells where repeated measures of different environmental samples were collected. And then we also set up a pseudo laboratory in the classroom adjacent, which allowed us to quickly collect the different biological samples that we did. So what did we collect? The samples were whole and capillary blood, urine, saliva, exhaled breath to understand if any of the metals enter or exit the lungs and of what type, toenail clippings, which we use as a biomarker of long-term exposure to toenails. On the environmental side, we collected soil at the fire ground, water for fire suppression, and at the fire ground. The turnout gear, which our colleagues from NC State, thanks to Dr. Brian Norman and his team, are analyzing, as well as ambient aerosols and wristbands. So what was the data collection time frame? So these poor 4 firefighters who were valiant and willing to participate in the electric vehicle fire provided 4 time periods of these individual biological results. So the experiment began on Wednesday, July 24th at 11 a.m. Before they even set foot on the state college. And we had blood, urine, swabs, exhaled breath, and toenail clippings collected. Thursday was the day of the EV burn, so early in the morning we all woke up, recollected biological samples again, blood, urine, saliva, and exhaled breath. Immediately after the fire, around 12 p.m., when fire suppression was completed, we recollected additional biological samples to see any differences in an acute change. And then on Friday, the next day, before we all departed, after the event, collected the same biological samples. So what did we learn? What did we see from here? So let's begin with our environmental samples. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Helena Solo-Gabriele, Professor of Chemical, Environmental, and Material Engineering in our University of Miami's College of Engineering, who will share with you the soil and water quality results.
Well, thank you so much. I also wanted to give credit to the students. Shruti Choudhary collected all of the samples that I'll be describing, and Emma Gonsalves, an undergraduate student, is assisting with the analysis, and we're all from the Department of Chemical, Environmental, and Materials Engineering. The objectives of what we will be presenting is we'd like to look at the impacts of the electric vehicle burn on the environment. We looked at sediments, water, and air. I'll specifically be describing the sediment and water, and Shruti will be describing the air. As Alberto mentioned, we set up a grid where it was a 3x3 grid upon which the electric vehicle was placed, and we had a front, left, behind, and right. And we collected sediment samples before the burn, and we also collected sediment samples after the burn. And we also collected water samples. In addition to the 3x3 grid, we also had an extended grid, as mentioned before, north, south, east, west, 50 feet and 100 feet from the vehicle. And this is what it looked like. You had the video, but specifically the water was collected from the impervious surface where it gathered. And we established a grid upon which the vehicle was placed. The fire was initiated and extinguished, and then samples were collected. This is what the vehicle looked like at the end of the EV burn. And the analysis is mentioned. There were 3 basic categories of analysis for the environment samples. They included the PFAS, the perfluoroalkyl substances. There were 26 different PFAS that were evaluated. For metals, there were 37. And for polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, there were 21. PFAS is a known carcinogen, also associated with immune dysfunction. Metals are known to be toxic when they're at levels above a certain limit. And the PAHs are also known to be carcinogens. The number of analyses are listed here in terms of the water, the sediment before and after, for a grand total of over 2,100 analytes. We've started looking at this data. What we're looking and presenting right now is very preliminary, but I want to describe some of these sediment results. These are the results for the PFAS, and PFAS are compounds that have chains of carbon and fluorine in them. They're the strongest bonds in chemistry. They're very difficult to degrade, and they persist for long periods of time. There are two main categories of PFAS. Actually, there are three, but the two that we found predominantly in the sediments are perfluorocarboxylic acids and perfluorosulfonic acids. The blue is the sulfonic acid. So the vast majority of the PFAS that was observed in the sediment was PFSAs, representing the bulk. But what was really interesting about these results is in the before samples, the levels are elevated, but they're also equally, if not less elevated, after, indicating that the background PFAS in these soils was very high. In addition to that, we collected two core samples. One was 2 inches in depth, the other one was 8 inches in depth. The 8-inch core sample had lower levels, indicating that the high levels of the PFAS were in the upper soil layers. Also went into the literature, because currently there are no PFAS regulations or guidelines for sediments. So looking in the literature, looking at what are considered contaminated sites, such as landfills, typically levels in landfill soils are on the order of 4 to 5 micrograms per kilogram, whereas in sites that have been impacted by fluorochemical plants that manufacture PFAS, on the order of 8 to 10 micrograms per kilogram. But the levels that we're seeing at the college are much higher, on the order of 25. So the levels that are observed at the college are considered to be high. In addition to that, in looking at the metals, again, we're looking very preliminarily. One of the metals that was observed to be higher after versus before was copper. What was interesting about that is when we compare it to the regulatory guidelines, in Florida we have what are called Florida Soil Cleanup Target Levels, which are guideline levels for exposure to sediments or recycled materials that are land applied. The guideline level for copper is 150, but the maximum, even though the levels went up after the burn, the maximum that was observed is 8 milligrams per kilogram, which is still below the regulatory guidelines. So in terms of the metals in the soil, it does not appear to be overly considered to be an elevated risk at this time. Now with the PAHs, of the 21 that were measured, 19 were elevated after more so than before. This is just an example of 4 of those PAHs, and comparing those to the guideline levels for soils. Again, the levels that we're observing in the soil, even though it went up after, is still below the risk level. So in the soil, the levels of the PAHs are not considered to be overly high, and that was observed consistently for the different PAHs. So our preliminary results show that the PFAS were very high in the soil, both before and after. So even though there was an electric vehicle burn there, the PFAS was elevated. The background was very high, probably from prior impacts from PFAS. The PAHs were observed to increase in the sediments after the EV burn, but they did not reach levels in the sediment that were considered to be excessive in terms of risk. We plan to continue analyzing the data, focusing on the water, and we also want to look at individual grids in our setup to determine the before and after and the impacts there. The applications to the fire station specifically are that the soil at the fire station should be remediated for PFAS. The levels of PFAS in those soils, especially in the upper level, are high, and there should be consideration to remediating those soils. Thank you.
Okay, let's pivot now and talk a little bit about the biology. So I invite to the stage Akash to look at the EV burn and heavy metal exposures.
Thank you, Dr. Caban. I'm Akash. I'm a graduate student in Dr. Dar's lab, and we work with the heavy metal exposure that firefighters encounter during the electric vehicle fire. So why do we even consider heavy metals when we talk about electric vehicle fire? So when you compare an internal combustion vehicle and when their engine or when the vehicle burns, there are parts that are containing a lot of metals, such as lithium-ion battery, the energy converter. So all those parts of the electric vehicle contain metals like lithium, graphite, silicon, magnesium, cobalt, manganese, nickel. All those metals are present in the lithium-ion battery and other correlated parts of the electric vehicles. And there is a study which says that when an electric vehicle was, when an internal combustion vehicle is in fire compared to an electric vehicle is in fire, there are like significantly higher levels of metals being exposed when the engine itself is being in fire. So considering that fact, we need to monitor the levels of metals in the firefighters, and whether that is increasing in the firefighters is a great concern. Apart from these metals, there are other toxic gases such as carbon monoxide, HCl, HF are ejected to the atmosphere during the fire of an electric vehicle. So what can we do as a lab that focus on like that, where we can detect the metals in low concentration? So during the electric vehicle fire, firefighters exposed to various metals, and by monitoring their levels of the metals in their system prior to the electric vehicle and after the electric vehicle fire, we can understand which all metals has been increasing in their system. And by considering those metals, and if we can develop or create a new equipments that can reduce the levels of metals that can firefighters being inhaled or getting into the system, that's a great thing, right? So in order for that, we monitored 29 metals which are highly present in the firefighter system, including lithium, manganese, cobalt, nickel, which are highly present in the electric vehicle, and we monitored those levels. So the significance of our experiment is to it allows us to track the increase in the exposure of certain metals during this time point when electric vehicle is being burned. And these samples are easy to collect and easy for post-processing for our understanding. And using this result, we can easily develop not easily, but maybe difficult, develop equipments or filters that can absorb these metals like lithium, nickel, cobalt, and reduce the exposure to those metals. And by understanding these metals, which are highly expressed, getting into the system, we can get aware to the firefighters so that they will be aware that these metals are our concern. So for this, we have collected from 4 time points, blood, urine, breath sample at time point T1, T2, T3, T4 that Dr. Caban mentioned. And T1, T2 are prior to the AV vehicle burning event, and T3, T4 are after the AV vehicle burn event. And urine and breath sample were directly processed without any post-processing. And blood sample was treated with EDTA to reduce the coagulation, followed by plasma isolation. So how do we quantify the metals amount in these samples? So we use an instrument called ICP-MS. It stands for inductively coupled plasma mass spectroscopy. It enables the analysis of metals in a sample up to parts per billion level, which is like very low concentration. And it can measure wide range of metals in a single go, as well as it has a very low least count. So it's very sensitive instrument. What happens to a sample when it enters to the ICP-MS? So when sample is introduced to ICP-MS, the sample is getting vaporized, followed by it get into a plasma, and then it react with a collider. Finally, it bombarded to a mass spectrometer, where it detects the amount of each metals. So when we analyze this sample for breath, what we observed is T1, T2, T3, T4 are different time points, and F1, F2, F3, F4 are different firefighters. And we have taken 2 control samples. One is from me and one is from Dr. Caban. And when we check that, what we observed is the amount of lithium present in the control samples, that's us, compared to the firefighters was lower. Firefighters has higher levels of lithium amount, but we didn't see much difference between the various time point. We also saw higher levels of magnesium and nickel, apart from calcium and zinc in the breath sample. Afterwards, we checked the levels of metals in blood and plasma, and we saw higher levels of manganese and strontium in the blood and plasma. But we didn't see any higher levels of lithium, cobalt, or nickel in these samples. Finally, what we checked is the levels of metals in urine, and we saw higher levels of iron, nickel, arsenic, vanadium in the after EV burn event. That is time point T3 and T4 had higher levels of vanadium, arsenic, nickel, and iron. So far, I have been saying this metal has been high, that metal being high, like metal like lithium, manganese, cobalt, chromium has been high in the firefighters, firefighters' blood, urea, or blood sample. But what this corresponds to, or what this is suggesting. So metals like nickel, arsenic can cause, they are non-carcinogens, and they can cause cancer. And metal like manganese can act as a neurotoxin and can impair your cognitive ability and cause a disease called manganism. And detection of these metals, this is just a cohort of for patients, for firefighters, and this is just a pilot study, as Dr. Caban mentioned. So if the data is consistent and if the results are being similar, we need to take these metals in consideration, and we need to develop our equipment in the future for the firefighters to reduce their exposure to these metals by scavenging these metals or by introducing a filter to their vaporizer, something like that. And this can help to reduce the toxicity in the firefighter system. With that, I thank all the firefighters who volunteered for the experiment and Florida State Fire College.
It's always wonderful to be able to include students in the research projects to train our future generation of firefighters. So speaking of students, I invite now Shruti to come up and present on our aerosols, who is mentored by our Dean of the College of Engineering, Pratim Biswas. Shruti?
As Dr. Caban mentioned, I'm a PhD student. First of all, I want to thank you all for the presence. You all inspire me, especially in the times when I get setbacks in my research. Secondly, I also want to thank Florida State Fire College, firefighters, all the research team, PIs, FCI team, without which the data that I'm going to show would not be possible. The way it all started was back in January 2024, when Dr. Biswas and I were just manifesting. I wish we could get a data with the electric fires. And in March, we get to do the study, like initialization of the study, and eventually we make this happen in July. Thank you for that. So today, I'll be talking about the aerosol emissions and the potential exposures. Before I do that, I just want to give you all the aerosols 101 so that you all know when you leave this room what are aerosols. Aerosols are particles that are suspended in the air. They are not gases or vapors. Gases and vapors are very different from aerosols. So to put this in a firefighter's perspective, I've shown you a size scale. If you see fire trucks in the range of 10 meters, firefighters in the range of 2 meters, radio, I know many of you are using that, maybe in a few centimeter scales. And then you keep on going down. 10 to the power minus 6 is your micron scale. 10 to the power minus 9 is your nanometer scale. That is where most of the respiratory exposure happens. And 10 to the power minus 10 is where your gases and your vapors come into the picture. Why those aerosols are important? Based on the size, it matters where they would deposit in the respiratory system. There has been many studies in the past looking at what is the heat release rate coming from those electric vehicle fires, what are the gases coming off, and also what are the metals. And they have been done in two different settings. One is like you collect all the smoke and the gases from one hood or chimney, and the second one is when you do it in a tunnel setting. And I have mentioned all the studies which has been done so far with live electric vehicle fires. But the biggest gap that comes is how do those aerosol emissions impact firefighters? Because none of those studies address that. Second is, what is the spatial distribution of those aerosols? Would they be same all across? So if the firefighter is not in a hot zone, are the firefighters still safe? If the firefighter is in cold zone, are they still safe? We need to know about that. And what is the composition, and is that uniform? So all these gaps we try to address in this specific study. The study setup. Before I explain that, I just want to thank my research buddies, Addison, Ashley, Lily, Emily, Akash, Mengre. There were a lot of moving parts where we have to transport back and forth, and they were of best support that I could get for that study. So the way we do this study setup is that you have a car in the middle on fire. We have to accomplish 3 different objectives, and I'll explain you one by one. So you have fire truck on one end, there's a command unit, there's a sensor attached to the command unit, it's known as MX, and there's also bunker gear doffing unit, because we also wanted to know what's coming off from the bunker gears. So many people want to know the answer. And then we also had the firefighters wearing the sensors. Firefighters, thank you so much, appreciate that. So the first one was looking at the real-time aerosol emissions during EV burn. So in order to look at the real-time aerosol emissions, we basically want to know what is the concentration of those particles during the EV burn. In that case, what we do is we ask the firefighter to wear that low-cost particulate matter sensor. So they attach that to their pocket, and when they are moving around and taking control of the fire, we can see how the particle concentration changes. So you can see firefighter A, B, C, D, E, all of them with that sensor. The second one, we wanted to look at the composition. Somebody in the audience asked the question for the wildland, but we definitely tried to answer that for the EV burn. We wanted to know what is the composition of those aerosols. We focus on PAHs and metals. PFAS was not a part of this specific study. So what we do, you can see there's NES West, basically arranged in northeast, west, south direction, and also a G, which is when the firefighters are doffing off the gear. So basically we get the complete picture of what's happening, and then we do the GCMS and ICP-MS analysis to find out what is the pH and the metal composition. The third one, as I mentioned before, aerosol resuspension from bunker gear doffing. So you can see that bunker gear doffing unit in the northeast region, in the cold zone, that's where the bunker gear doffing unit is, even after the command unit. So in that case, we had just one firefighter who was without decon, who doff off their gear inside the bunker gear doffing unit, and the other ones, first, they go through a bunker gear decontamination area, or preliminary exposure reduction, which is a new terminology, and then they doff off their gear inside the doffing unit. So looking at first one about what is the aerosol concentration looking like during the EV burn. I'll show you 3 different scenarios. First is hot zone, another one is warm zone, and in the upcoming slides about the cold zone. So important to look at the y-axis. So you'll see in the north direction, you have firefighter in the hot zone. Your fire starts around 10:21, and you see the peak coming up. The biggest peak comes up during fire suppression, which was at 10:35, and the concentration exceeds 3,000 micrograms per meter cube, which is almost equivalent to how much particles would come out from a power plant. And then you see somewhere around 10:44 where firefighters doffing off their bunker, and then you see a slight peak, which is associated with the increase in the particle resuspension that could be happening. And then on the right-hand side, firefighter in the warm zone, notice that it's not milligram, it's microgram. My mistake, sorry about that. And that firefighter is in east direction and in the warm zone. Even though the concentration does not exceed 2,000 micrograms per meter cube, but it's still a lot higher. If I were to ask you what is the PM 2.5 concentration in this room, would you guess what would be the concentration? It's less than 10. So that's a lot higher when it comes to what those aerosol emissions look like. And then the peak that you see around 10:44, that's another one where the bunker gear were decon process happening because of the aerosols that were just resuspending during the decon phase. And then something very interesting. In the northeast direction, we are in the cold zone. When the fire starts happening, the concentration starts increasing. Unfortunately, I missed the data because maybe somebody put a jacket or something happened. I missed that data. But because the fire was not in control, after 30 minutes, there was another fire reignition, and you can see again those nice peaks coming up back and forth. And then we all went back to the normal around 10 micrograms per meter cube after 11:35, which says that even in cold zone, we still have exposure to those aerosols, and it's important to wear SCBA in that region also. Now imagine that this study was done in a open environment. Things would be very different if it's a tunnel or if it's a house. Now, just wanted to quickly look at the pH compositions. When we did the pH composition, especially around the fire, most of the time, predominantly, the direction of the wind was from south to north. So that's why in the north, you will see a lot higher concentration. So blue is like low concentration, but as you increase to red, it's getting higher and higher. Something which is very interesting to note is usually you'll find pHs in low molecular weights, and you won't find in most of the studies high molecular weight pHs. Why? Because all those high molecular weight pHs are aerosol wine. And what is the biggest problem? They are all probable human carcinogens. Another problem is that those compositions differ in different directions. So firefighters may not be safe in all the directions around the EV. Specifically, if you look at the benzoapyrene, I was surprised to see that it was not in the north direction, but it was in east and west opposite directions. Now you're like, did you do the reanalysis? We did that again, and we found the same results. So that's what exactly is happening. We really want to know what mechanism would that be, but that was what the results came off. Then we also wanted to see the metals. Again, blue or gray is the not found region, and then red, it's like higher concentrations. What we found was during the fire, in west, north, south, we find lithium, magnesium, aluminum, calcium, vanadium, chromium, all those yellow regions, all those metals went higher from background levels. So the BG or background that you see, it's before the fire, and then east, west, north, south are during the fire, and gear is when we are sampling the air when firefighters were doffing off their gear. So something that we got to know was that aluminum, also like arsenic, all those came up when firefighters were doffing off their gear. And again, those metal concentrations differ in different directions. The last, we were talking about the aerosol resuspension from bunker gear doffing. When we asked the firefighters to doff off their gear, so you will see I'm plotting over here, how does those particles differ as the size? Because I said that the size is a very important parameter. And then you'll see that I'm comparing non-decon versus decon. The non-decon is those round circles, and decon is the star mark. So you'll see that For particles less than 500 nanometers, the gross decon is not very effective. So we'll have to come up with new ways. Again, caution, it was a very small size sample, but we can still learn a lot from this data. And on the below, I've also shown what metal compositions and pH compositions were higher in the gear scale. Benzoylpyrene is a carcinogen. So like, let's say when the firefighter is doffing off the gear and they don't have the SCBA, they are definitely inhaling those specific types of pHs. So we gotta be careful about that. Oops. Sorry. Key takeaways. Final slide. Firefighter exposures depend on the concentration of those particles, what size of those aerosols are, where the position is, what is the total time it takes to extinguish the fire. In the video, you would have seen that it may take just the 30 minutes to extinguish a commercial vehicle with gas-powered, but electric vehicles, 8 hours, 6 hours, your time to extinguish a fire is just enhanced. Then, high molecular weight pHs that are probable human carcinogens were found in those aerosol samples. And the key takeaways that I really want the firefighters to take away is something that they can start looking forward to is how can they use variable particulate matter sensors as an instrumental tool to monitor aerosol on real-time scale. So like, what if you have those sensors with you that gives you the concentration on a real-time scale, which keeps on telling you what's the exposure. Second one is use multi-level exposure reduction strategy, which means you do your gear decontamination, you use your SCBA, you use adequate ventilation in the built environment, and also look for new aerosol removal technologies. And finally, firefighters should also be educated about the recent advances in battery technology. With that, thank you so much. Appreciate your...
Our future is bright in the fire service and research. Okay, last but not least, I want to invite to the stage my colleague, Dr. Emre Dikici from our Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. He's my compadre here on this research project as we went to the field and really sweated everything off to set up the project. So he's going to share with us a little bit about the environmental and biological samples that were collected from his perspective. So, Emre.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Hello. Thank you so much, Alberto. I appreciate it, and I thank everyone who participated in this study, our group in Biochemistry and Molecular Biology Department. I'll start really quick. Most of my colleagues explained to you what happens when you have like soot and other aerosols, heavy molecular weight PAHs get condensed on them, and then you inhale it. I'm going to talk about what happens in the vapor phase, like the volatile part of the organic compound. So we did a lot of like air sampling, and then to look at the low molecular weight PAHs, and then how they get distributed during the EV burn. And then, yes, you can find the PAHs around, but it is important also to know how much of it is internalized by our firefighters. So we also collected urines from them at different time points that Dr. Caban-Martinez explained, and we analyzed those also for PAHs and see if we could find a correlation. Finally, very briefly, I'm going to talk about the amount of blood we collected and send out for PFAS analysis and the results of that PFAS analysis. So you have seen the scheme all throughout the whole talk today. What we did is we placed our wristbands, silicone wristbands that are very good at actually absorbing the volatile organic compounds, and placed them at strategic locations around the fire. And then we collected them afterwards and then analyzed it in our lab. So as I mentioned, the silicone wristbands are very, very useful samplers for us. And what we did is not only we placed them around the fire, but also asked our firefighters to wear one, so that we can look at what kind of job description during that day get exposed to more PAHs. We received the samples, collected them, and then extracted them using high-performance extraction systems and analyzed them by using GCMS. And then mostly we looked at about 24 PAHs, but we are looking at the low molecular weight PAHs because PAHs usually gets built up from smaller molecules to a larger molecule. So it is very normal to see high levels of low molecular weight PAHs in the air than the heavy molecular weight ones. So then what we did is we extracted and analyzed by using gas chromatography, mass spectrometry. And for someone who's not very familiar, this is essentially a two-component system. The chromatography part separates a mixture of compounds into individual components, and then mass analyzer essentially ionizes these compounds, fragments them, and then looks at these fragments. And these fragments are unique to each compound and tell you what it is, and then we can tell how much is there. So if you look at the silicone wristbands that is placed in the environment around, that you will see that the lower molecular weight PAHs, such as naphthalene and acetylnaphthalene, are higher at certain directions. This is mostly depending on how the wind is blowing and which direction they are going. And but as you can see, like as the molecular weight of the PAHs gets larger and larger, the levels get smaller and smaller because we are mostly looking at the volatile versions. And then we also collected the wristbands from our firefighters and then compared it. As you can see, most of them have higher levels of PAHs, which is expected. Unfortunately, that's a sad truth. They get exposed during their duties to these carcinogens, and depending on how close they are to the fire, that also affects how much PAH exposure they get. As you can see, one of the firefighters there have significantly higher exposures than the other ones, and this is mostly because he is in the hot zone. He is the one who's holding the water into the fire, and he's getting all the smoke and all the other high molecular weight PAHs. So now that we know that they are exposed, we wanted to see if these PAHs are internalized and essentially caused any damage. So what we did is we collected the urine, and the urine is extracted in a similar manner and analyzed essentially with the same techniques. And then what we wanted to see is if there is any type of correlation. And if you look at the results that are pre and post, the average pH concentrations are higher after the burn than they were before the burn, which is also expected. And what we look at, interestingly though, again, some of our firefighters have significantly higher exposure levels than the other ones, and this is again depends on how much you are getting exposed. The PAHs get internalized through breathing, or they can be deposited on your skin and then go through transdermally, and you can obviously inhale them if you are not vigilant with your protective gear. This is also very important to be aware of your surroundings during a fire and see like which way like the wind is blowing, for example. And I'm going to talk about very briefly about the PFAS analysis that we have done. I'm not going to go into details about PFASs. We have already talked about it, and I'm 100% sure you guys are ready to go eat. So I'm just going to briefly give the take-home results of the PFAS analysis. The blood PFAS analysis showed that they are increased after the fire burn, which is also corroborated with the other experiments that we have done, that after the fire the levels are higher, and unfortunately that also correlates that our firefighters get exposed to them. So as conclusions, if I can go like one more time, in a fire, just like a normal combustion engine fire, PAHs are released into the environment because there is a lot of organic matter that needs to be burning that are burning. Unlike combustion engine fires, though, electrical vehicle fires usually takes significantly longer time to extinguish because of their properties, which means that it is highly likely that our firefighters will get exposed to more and more time for these PAHs. The closer they are, the higher the levels, obviously. The low molecular PAHs are mostly in the air, and then higher levels are in the soot or the aerosol that is around. Wind direction especially plays an important role. And the exposure correlates. In the urine, we do see higher levels. So the key takeaway is please do your decontamination steps after each fire because large quantities of the PAHs are released, and then your protection is very important. And the levels of PAHs that are released in an EV is very similar to a combustion engine fire, but obviously it takes longer time to extinguish an EV fire. With that, I would love to thank everyone who has participated in this study, especially our firefighter volunteers and Fire State College to let us conduct this experiment. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to entertain any questions here from the room or from online. Yes, Chief. There's a microphone behind you, if you wouldn't mind, so the folks online can hear you.
Thank you. Do we know what the soil contained beforehand? Is that a common training ground where they always burn stuff there? What was in that soil that had the elevated levels before the burn? You know what your...
It was were the PFAS species, and specifically the PFSAs were elevated. So it may have been from prior burns or prior activity.
Was that a normal training ground area for them? Like, did they have foam runoff always there?
I don't know those details of that particular site.
Yeah, that's a question we can certainly talk to the training facility to see what other burns or practices they do in there. Yeah.
And then another question: when they did your post-fire decon, was it just with water or was it with soap as well? Scrubbing?
It was soap and water.
Soap and water and scrubbing and all that. All right, thank you.
Proper procedures.
Other questions from the room? Yes, in the back over here. Microphone's coming right up to you. While that microphone is coming up in the question, all the presentations that you're seeing today, including the posters, are available in your lanyards. Surprise, if you take your lanyards and you pull them apart, there's a USB drive inside of it, and all the presentations and posters are on there. So if you're taking pictures, you already have them. All right, we'll take the question in the back.
Yeah, you guys had mentioned the low-cost particulate matter sensor they use for the detection of the pHs.
Oh, can you guys hold on because I can't hear. Which is a surprise. Speak a little louder.
Sorry, the low-cost air quality monitor that you guys use for the sensors there. Do you guys know the cost on that for possible implementation with departments?
Okay. Do you guys know the monitors that are being used for measuring? Do you know?
Are you asking about the cost?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know the cost, but I can, please feel free to email and I can get back to you with that.
Awesome, I appreciate it.
Okay. Any other technical questions for our scientists around the EV burn? Okay, I guess you guys are hungry. It's time for lunch. All right, so...
Alberto.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see. It's so blinding. I'm sorry.
With the translation, please. ¿Qué pasó en base a sus estudios? ¿Qué recomendarían ustedes hacer con los uniformes expuestos a estos incendios?
¿Con los uniformes qué?
Con los expuestos a estos incendios.
Oh, okay, ya listo. Okay. So the question is, what are the recommendations from the scientists around handling the turnout gear after these types of fires with EV burns? If there's any recommendations that you have. Should it be similar to like they normally do for combustion engines, or anything special or different?
I think we, right now we don't have all the research. I think there's a new technology that's coming up like CO2 cleaning. I think that needs evaluation. But as a first set of safety measure, first is that always doff off the gear in a ventilated environment. Just don't do it in a closed environment. And then the way you do your regular bunker gear closing, like put that in a plastic wraps and not in the fire truck itself. I think that's going to help a lot more until the new research comes.
And also my colleague, Dr. Brian Norman, who's an expert on cleaning, probably still working on a slide somewhere. Let's see, somewhere back there. He's done. He gave me the signal he's done. We'll be able to answer that question about some of the new and different technologies for gear cleaning, particularly from these contaminants. Okay, hopefully I didn't miss any questions. Thank you all so very much. Enjoy lunch, and we'll come back again at 1:10. We'll give a little bit extra, so 1:10.